Welcome to 1984 Lore, and today I discuss 5 things I'm glad they left out of the Radford film. While a great book, like many classics, it can be hard for even the best adaptations to fully incorporate all of the book on screen. In the film medium, certain additions or changes may disrupt the flow of the core narrative. Of course, to purists, that is, some hardcore fans of the book, not seeing certain characters and events may be disappointing, but in my opinion, these changes in the film make sense. Number 5. The drunk prole woman. It may be just me, but I always read the appearance of the amorous and inebriated prole woman in Winston's cell as comedic, even if in a dark setting. The scene in question is in the first chapter of Part 3 after Winston's arrest. In a holding cell, Winston encounters an enormous prole woman who is unceremoniously dumped across his legs, almost breaking them. After verbally abusing the guards that dumped her there, she then copiously vomits before noticing Winston and immediately taking a fancy to him. While chatting, the woman who claims to share his surname muses that she may be Winston's mother. While funny, it does break the tension somewhat in the lead up to O'Brien's reveal and the beginning of Winston's ordeal. The tension was held right to the end of the previous chapter, with no guard hitting Winston, but Winston squeamishly anticipating the initial blow regardless, as he stood there completely exposed, arms overhead. Winston admits that the woman could be his mother, but in truth this seems unlikely. Radford's adaptation does not depict the encounter, which I think was probably for the best, as I could see it diffusing the good tension that had already built up, while slowing down the narrative too. As with other entries in this list, its exclusion takes nothing away from the main narrative in my opinion. Number 4. Parsons using the toilet. Staying with this part of the book, while Parsons does make an appearance in Radford's film, this scene is relatively brief and broadly follows the novel itself. However, interestingly, Radford does seem to give the character some of the skull-faced man's lines from the book, a decision which I wasn't overly keen on. However, this is not a video on what I thought should be included in the film, so I will discuss this particular character and scene on another occasion. One particular detail I think was rightfully excluded was how Parsons ended his time in the cell with Winston. In the film, Parsons' departure is much more dignified, if dark. The fear and mystique around Room 101 is built upon, with his condemnation to it, and he is merely ordered out of the cell, slumping miserably towards the door, and visibly distraught. In the book, however, after similarly telling Winston about how he was denounced by his daughter, he then proceeds to nervously rip down his shorts and defecate in the only available lavatory. What's worse, given it was defective, the waste could not be properly disposed of, and the cell reeked for hours after Parsons was removed. Probably more so even than the giant prole woman who took a fancy to Winston. I personally must admit I usually interpret this in a humorous way, though I understand I may be in a minority here. The act is likely intended to convey the extreme nervousness of an already jittery character. Parsons, of course, already infamous as constantly sweating and always active on the party's behalf, as if to forestall any doubts he is a loyal and valuable party comrade. That kind of addition would almost certainly have been taken comedically by some. I don't think I'm particularly special in my reaction to it. Even if not, you don't tend to see this kind of act, to put it in a YouTube-friendly way, that often in film anyway. While doing that does show the reader how nervous Parsons is about his fate, in the book he is not sentenced, at least at that stage, to Room 101. Radford's film, in my opinion, adequately shows us this already through Gregor Fisher's performance, without what would be a pretty jarring and disgusting act. Number 3. Ampleforth generally. Ampleforth, for those unaware, is a minor character who also works in the Ministry of Truth, but his job is primarily to edit Oldspeak poems and literature, and he does not play a significant role in events, though like the previous two characters, he also shows up in Winston's cell. Ampleforth is somewhat attached to Winston in his own way, so much so that the latter thinks he would sit with him if he saw him alone at a table in the canteen. This makes his move to sit with Julia alone before others all the more urgent when Winston initiates their first aware conversation in the canteen. Ampleforth shows up in Winston's cell, as we have noted, and unlike Parsons, who is merely removed, in the book, he is consigned to room 101. This is mildly interesting, given that, according to Winston's summary of his appearance and demeanour, he doesn't seem that changed. He's a few days away from a shave and somewhat dazed, but certainly not beaten to a pulp or even significantly cognitively impaired. That is, he seems perfectly capable of answering questions, which indicates the psychological conditioning that Winston later endured was likely not even initiated with him yet, or at least not that advanced. This is interesting as it indicates that there are different classes of thought criminal. Since Ampleforth is ready so early for room 101, we can deduce there is very little intellectually wrong with him, to the extent that he can be broken in room 101 relatively early when compared to, say, Winston, who we know likely endured weeks, if not months, of O'Brien's curing process. While all very interesting, however, it doesn't seem to fit well into a film adaptation, which is likely why he is not depicted in any way in Radford's film. I could be wrong, but I get the impression that he was likely just not deemed all that necessary to telling the story of 1984, and his own ominous sentencing to room 101 and the resultant build-up of tension that would contribute is already fulfilled by Parsons in the film. Number 2, Catherine Smith generally. For similar reasons to the other aforementioned characters, I don't feel particularly shortchanged by the omission of Winston's estranged wife. While an important part of Winston's backstory, Catherine is not essential to Winston's journey within the plot itself. Catherine never appears directly in the novel and is only ever referred to via recollection. Catherine was Winston's wife for around 15 months in the early 70s and was an ultra-orthodox thinker in contrast to her husband. They separated following their failure to produce a child, and she is mentioned later during Winston's interrogation, his accusers charging him with her murder, though Winston notes they must know that she was still alive. Radford's film does include Winston's mother and sister as characters to beef up his backstory, but Catherine's inclusion and the exploration of their failed relationship may have been a digression too many. Number 1, Julia's instructions changed to a note. This is only a slight change, but actually makes sense in terms of the flow of things in the film, and also when properly considered, given the context of the world. This is not to criticise Orwell's own method of information transfer that he has Julia use in the novel, as it is his baby after all, but it is to suggest another plausible interpretation of why this may be a rare instance of where the film may, dare I say, improve on the novel. So what am I talking about? I refer to the encounter in Victory Square following Winston and Julia's rushed conversation in the canteen. In the novel, Julia has Winston meet her under the cover of the crowd in the square. Though full of telescreens, the sheer volume of people and the volume of the noise should have served to mask any contact. This indeed enables her to give Winston spoken instructions of how to get to the hiding place in the country. This is quite impressive, Winston noting it was like she had a map in her head and was able to memorise and relay detailed geographical features and directions. Though cool, this does strike me as kind of risky in a couple of ways though. Even with the crowd, she could still be overheard by someone nearby, perhaps an inquisitive party member. It would have taken her a minute or two at least to relay these instructions. What's more, she also risks a lot in assuming Winston had the capacity to memorise the details on the hop like that. Not everyone can do that after all. In the film, the exchange is fast, with Julia passing Winston another note under the cover of the crowd. This removes the risk of being overheard, and also reduces the contact time, at least in theory, and the chance of being spotted. Of course, one reason Orwell may have depicted it that way was perhaps because of the very obvious risk that a written note with identifiable handwriting could quickly mark Julia out, even if Winston didn't betray her if captured, though they had the note. I think given the two methods, the note and her instruction that he destroy it fits better in the film than having her muttering instructions aloud for however long it would have taken. A note is more easily memorized later on, and the giving of the information, as I've said, is much easier and hidden, which is more in keeping with the danger of the telescreen and the bodies and ears that were close to them. Those were my thoughts anyway, but what do you think? Would you have preferred a complete transfer of every character and scene into the film, or would it jar the narrative somewhat? Are there any changes you spotted that you agree with? Let us all know in the comments, and remember to smash that like button to help keep 1984 lore out of the YouTube memory hole, and I'll see you next time.